Welcome to the Black Father's Pulse, the podcast where fatherhood meets purpose. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas, clinical psychologist and professor, here to guide you through the multifaceted journey of Black fatherhood. Please note, the views expressed here are my own and not those of my employer. But get ready to dive into the dynamic world of Black fatherhood, where we celebrate the highs, tackle the lows, and share plenty of laughs along the way. Let's keep the pulse of fatherhood beating strong and vibrant. The African proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child," wasn't just a saying, it was our lived reality, where extended families, neighbors, and community institutions collectively shaped and protected our children. But shifts in culture, economics, and social structures have fractured that village, leaving many fathers and families navigating parenthood in isolation. Today, we're exploring what it truly means to restore the village and why rebuilding these bonds of fatherhood, culture, and community are essential for the next generation. And to help us with this conversation, we have a guest who's been driving some of this conversation, and in doing so has not shied away from differences in opinions. Delano Squires is a research fellow in the Richard and Helen DeVos Center of Human Flourishing at the Heritage Foundation. Delano's work has been published by The Root, Newsweek, National Review, The American Conservative, The Federalist, Blaze Media, and the Institute for Family Studies. He is currently writing a book about the Black family, and it will be published in 2026, and we would love to have him back to talk about that book when it is finally published. Before joining the Heritage Foundation, Delano worked for the District of Columbia government for more than a decade. During that time, he provided free technology training programs for low-income residents and served in the city's gun violence prevention office. Delano earned his Bachelor of Science degree in computer engineering from the University of Pittsburgh and a graduate degree in public policy from the George Washington University. Welcome to the Black Father's Pulse podcast, Delano.
Thank you for having me.
So, one, thank you so much for just kind of carving out some time for us to have this conversation and to engage the audience from the Black Father's Pulse podcast. It sounds from your bio and just social media and just media in general that there's just so much that you're doing. Your voice is so sought after. What inspiring thing are you doing right now, besides, of course, writing your book?
Yeah, so, right now, my main focus is on sort of making the argument that we need to revive the institution of marriage and rebuild the family. So in terms of my day job, I do that with respect to American families, generally speaking. But I think, the work that I'm doing specifically around the Black family is certainly inspiring. You mentioned my book. I also have a report out right now called Moving Beyond Moynihan. The subtitle is A New Plan to Revive Marriage and Rebuild the Black Family. So that reference in the title is obviously to the Moynihan Report, right, which came out in 1965 and remains the most consequential analysis of the Black family, I would say, ever produced in this country. So my report sort of picks up where Moynihan left off, addressing issues of family, understanding, obviously, that the world in 2025 is different than the world in 1965. So I talk about what he discussed in his report, how the Black family got to its current state, and what needs to be done moving forward, as I said, to revive the institution of marriage and rebuild the family. So that work inspires me, and I hope to start the types of conversations and to light a spark with respect to this particular issue, because I don't think it gets the attention that it deserves. And in my estimation, there's no way to improve outcomes for the Black community for the foreseeable future unless we begin to talk about how we restore and rebuild the traditional family unit.
Thank you so much for that, Delano. As you think back to when you first started doing this work on Black families and fatherhood and all of this wonderful work and very necessary work, can you go back to one moment as a father that completely shifted how you see yourself as a person?
That's a good question. So, I mean, I would say I started doing this work. I started writing about issues around the black family well over a decade ago. I used to write for a site called Black and Married with Kids, and the couple that started that website, Ronnie and Lamar Tyler, did so because they wanted to create more positive images of black families. And when I started writing for them, I was actually single at the time. I was the only single writer. And I actually ended up meeting my wife at one of their documentary screenings because in addition to the website, they had produced several documentaries, and I met her at one of the screenings. So that's when I really started to do this work publicly and formally. In terms of, an instance that changed me as a dad, I think honestly just the birth of my first child. All right, my daughter is 9. She's going to turn 10 in January. And I remember holding her for the first time and understanding that my life would never be the same. So I think that moment really changed me in ways that were hard to describe in words. And the combination of those two things, writing about this issue, researching this issue, and then living this issue in my day-to-day life, I think have only helped to inspire me and empower me as I have continued to do the same work over the past, close to 15 years.
And so in those 15 years, those early years of those first 15, because I'm sure there's a lot more years of your writing and conversation is going to be coming down the road. When did you realize that this narrative about black fathers was broken? And what moment made you decide to finally start to push back?
So, I mean, I knew the narrative around black fathers, I would say, is incomplete. I knew that growing up. Right, I knew my parents have been married 44 years now. Growing up in New York, all my best friends, all of our parents have been married 40 plus years. We grew up in a very tight knit community, a village, as you had referred to it before. And within that village, almost everybody I knew had married parents and was growing up with a dad. So the popular narrative around black fathers that black fathers are absent. They don't care about their kids. They abandon the mothers of their children. I knew was not universal. And even as as an adult living in Washington, D.C. and seeing, when I would take my daughter to daycare or to school, 35 to 40% of the parents doing pickups or drop-offs were fathers. So again, I know that the popular mainstream narrative about absent black dads is woefully incomplete. I will say this, though. I think sometimes there's a push to discredit that narrative by making it seem as if, everything is A-okay. And people will, refer to research, particularly, and I'm sure you've heard this and seen this, the 2013 CDC study on fathers that showed that black fathers are more involved with their children, whether they're younger children or older children, across a range of activities from reading to their kids every day, to eating with them, to bathing them and being involved in their lives. They're more involved, generally speaking, than their white or Hispanic counterparts. And people will use that study to say, these narratives are completely wrong. Right. What people miss is that the difference in involvement is less along racial lines and more along the lines of whether a father lives with his children or does not live with his children. And there you see much greater disparities between residential dads and non-residential dads. And how that relates back to this issue is that about 45% of black children are raised by a single mom. So that's millions of children who do not have everyday in-the-house contact with their fathers. And that does lead to issues that it's impossible for us to ignore if we truly care about the state of the black family, and more importantly, if we truly care about the future of our children.
And I think you're referencing the 2013 article. I think that's Moshe and colleagues referencing the CDC study that was, and I think a lot of people, including myself, have used it to talk about the significant disparities or significant differences in a positive way of father involvement. And you are correct that it is more than just father involvement. When you start digging deeper into that article, you see that there are some more nuanced findings that people often don't take cognizance of when they're talking about father involvement, especially among African American fathers. And so you talk about the narrative being incomplete as opposed to being inaccurate. I think a lot of people say, well, the narrative is wrong. And I think I agree with you that the conversation is less about the narrative being wrong, because to say that the narrative is wrong is to suggest that there is zero truth in the narrative, which is not true. There is some truth in the narrative that we do have a significant number of black fathers who are not involved for one reason or another. And I explore that with a number of other guests on the podcast. But what do you think makes the conversation, because I think then there's the other shift to the pendulum, that all black fathers are uninvolved, all black fathers are deadbeats, and I hear from your story and from the stories of a lot of other persons that I've had in the podcast that I'm involved. My father was involved. I have all these stories of lots of black men who were involved, who are fathers, who are doing the great work. What makes the story of the deadbeat, uninvolved black father so palatable for American society, at least?
Yeah, I think it's a number of factors that play into it, right? So there is, as long as this country has been in existence, there have been efforts to stereotype and caricature black Americans, right? So whether that's stereotypes around people being lazy or... So I think part of it is that these stereotypes around black Americans, African Americans, have been in existence for centuries, right? So whether that is, I'm thinking of someone like Dr. Samuel Cartwright, who came up with the term drapetomania, that said, that enslaved blacks who sought freedom had some sort of medical condition or malady. There's stereotypes about black people being over-sexualized or violent or lazy. So I think anything that plays into existing stereotypes will find some type of audience. So I can put that part to the side. But the other part of it, and this is where people have to be honest, and we have to be honest within our own community, is that, again, 45%, so this is almost half of all black children are raised by a single mom. So when you factor that in, again, you're talking about millions of children over the course of generations who have been raised apart from a father. And I think it's important to say, and obviously you know this, that it's possible for a man to be involved in the life of his children even if he doesn't live with them. There are couples who navigate this, whether after divorce or whether parents were never married, where dads can be still active within the lives of their children. But one, is a difference when you live with your children and you see them and interact with them on an everyday basis, and when you don't. And especially if you have, let's say, multiple children, a man can't be in several different places at one time. Yeah. But the other part of it is for every however, one man who's active and involved in his child's life, there's some number who are not. Right. Some may not even know they have children. Some may have such a deteriorated relationship with the mother of the children that they figure it's not even worth the headache to engage. Some may know that they have the kid but didn't want children, so feel no obligation to parent the child. And some may just be pulled in several different directions, particularly, as I said, if you have multiple children by multiple women. And so sometimes a guy, and this is irrespective of race, a man may be closer to the children of his girlfriend because he lives with them, right, than to his own children, who he does not live with. So I think, again, there's often a demand for, the worst stereotypes as it relates to black people. But there's also a there that has to be honestly dealt with to say, look, it would be different if it was only 5% of black kids who live with a single mom or apart from their dad. But when it's close to half, that means that this is a real issue that we have to reckon with.
Thank you so much. So I think you're leading to this next question, which is that, so we talk often about the village being broken. And that the way we raised children before doesn't quite seem to be the same way that we're doing it. There's not that same community efficacy, that strength that people used to draw from their communities. If the village is as broken as we say it is, can we rebuild? And if we can rebuild, what can every young black father, or every black father, regardless of age, what can every black father who's watching and listening do about rebuilding community?
I definitely believe that the village can be rebuilt. But let me, because I'm big on defining terms, right? Or at least characterizing what I mean when I say the village.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm a person who grew up in that era of, it taking a village to raise a child. My parents were married young. They lived with my aunt and uncle, after they first got married and after I was born. My aunt and uncle had a next door neighbor who would watch me sometimes. And a few doors down, there was an older Trinidadian lady who would watch me after school until my aunt came home. And then I would go there and eat dinner. And then when my mom picked me up and took me back home, then I'd eat again. I come from a large family. So my mom is the youngest of 10. My dad is the second youngest of 6. So I had aunts and uncles who I would spend time with, who would pick me up from school, who would watch me. And then I had a church family who in some cases are closer to me than some of my blood relatives, who also contributed to my upbringing. And I think I'm not unique in this sense. So when I say a village, I'm talking about the extended kinship networks, right? Those ties of those blood relations. I'm talking about people within the community who your parents and your relatives trust. I'm talking about, sort of a spiritual family that, again, come around and support families. All of those different groups are within the village. Now, you notice the one group I did not name. I did not name any government administrators. I didn't name any social workers. I didn't name any politicians. So the village I grew up in did not involve direct. There was no direct involvement from either state, local, or federal government. And I think that's important for reasons that we may very well get to. So that's what I think of when I think about a village. Do I think that is possible today? Yes, I do. Do I think it's necessary? Yes, because it's difficult raising children by yourself. But the other thing that I want to say clearly is that sometimes people will talk about the village and put it in tension with what has come to be known as the nuclear family, right? The man, woman living together, typically it's husband and wife raising children together. I don't see those two things as in tension. I see that natural family, husband and wife raising their own children, as the foundation for the village. Right? So that household is the foundation, and the village comes along to complement and supplement what is going on there. So there was no one in my life, in my village, that was inculcating values opposite to what my parents were. Everyone there was in support of what my parents were doing. So I think it's possible. I think it's made more difficult just because we live in a different society. Oftentimes, young people leave, let's say, to go away for college and don't come back to where they grew up. So it's harder to have some of those connections there. People, I believe, are more insulated, right? Oftentimes people spend more time on social media than they do getting to meet other people in real life. Some people don't even know who their neighbors are or may not know them other than by passing. So certain things may be made more difficult. Families are smaller today than they were 50, 60 years ago. So you just don't have as many aunts and uncles. You don't have as many cousins. So certain things make this a little bit more challenging. But I think it's possible to raise a family in such a way where you're getting external support that supplements what you're doing within the home. So my thing to every black man is, even before you become a father, is to find yourself a suitable wife.
Yeah.
And to build according to that traditional, and certainly I would argue that biblical blueprint, is to build the family according to how its architect created the design, because that will improve your odds of having a loving, lifelong, multi-generational sort of successful, family structure. So that would be my first thing, is to find a suitable wife, someone with whom you are aligned with respect to your values and your views and your worldview, to marry, commit to her for a lifetime, then have your children, and from there, or in addition to that, work with the people who love you to raise up those children in such a way that you can continue this particular process, in perpetuity across generations.
Thank you so much. So before I come back to the tension between tradition and progress, I want to ask you to speak then to that. So your advice, I think, is awesome. It's great for somebody who has not started yet. But what about that large swath of fathers who already have their first child with their second partner or their third partner or their fifth partner, are not married, might have multiple children, so who are already starting, for want of a better word, behind the eight ball. So they've already gone beyond this. Maybe in their next relationship, they could be more careful about selecting a partner, be more long-term in their thinking process, planning process. But what about the kids that already exist and the relationships that already exist?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one of my mottos in life is to grow where I'm planted. So if you're a man and you already have children, you can do whatever you can to improve those relationships. Let's say you're not with any of the children's mothers. Improve those relationships, and sometimes that may mean having to reconcile, not in terms of the relationship itself with the mother of your child, but just to get to the place where you two can be cordial so that you can have the type of relationship you want with your child. Some of that may mean taking, legal action, right? So many states are moving to a 50-50 shared sort of joint custody model in divorce proceedings and child family court. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because oftentimes fathers are treated like the appendix of the family. Great if you have one, but not particularly necessary.
Yes, yeah.
And I think more men need to understand that their children need them. They're not just a nice add-on, right? Like fathers parent children in ways different than mothers, generally speaking. More likely to focus on gross motor skills, more likely to use whole words, certainly more likely to roughhouse. Right? Even things like, dad will start throwing his baby in the air at 3, 4, 5 months. Moms would never think of that. All right? Because, you're going to hurt the baby, you're going to drop the baby. So there are things that fathers bring to a household that are unique and cannot be replaced. And I think it's important for men to work on those relationships wherever they are. But aside from that, one thing that a father can do with his own children is to pass on certain values. And this is possible even if you have not perfectly lived them out. And we know this because we see this on an everyday basis, particularly when it comes to education. Right? There are plenty of parents who've raised children, and from the time that the child can remember, the parent has been preaching to them, do good in your studies, focus on your schoolwork, go on and go to college and get your bachelor's, your master's, your PhD. And you can have a parent doing that who didn't go past high school.
You're right, yeah.
So we found ways, and we acknowledge the reality that parents but do want better for their children than what they have accomplished themselves. And I think if we can find ways to do that with respect to education, we can find ways to do that when it comes to family formation as well.
Thank you so much for that. So going back to that tension between tradition and progress, I think you were hinting at the difference in what support looks like, what village looks like. I grew up in a literal village in the Caribbean, and we knew everybody and played with everybody. Everybody was in everybody's business, but everybody was protected by everybody. There were so many eyes around the village. I didn't always appreciate all the eyes around the village because it meant that whatever I did on the playground got back to my parents long before I got home, and that was not always pleasant. But there was safety in that. The nuclear family, like you said, was the core. but everybody else, the extended family, the church family, the community family, came around each nuclear family and provided support. I can throw in a biological analogy, I won't. But today it feels like, and I want to think part of it is the hyper individualism of capitalist societies, of Western cultures, the significant reliance on government, where at this point it feels like a lot of our support systems are outside of relationships. They're more transactional. So our kids have after-school programs. Our kids have clubs. Not that these things are not necessarily good and don't have positive things, positive elements to them and benefits, but that those have become our major support systems. Even daycare facilities. I don't remember going to daycare. My parents talk about leaving me with my grandmother or leaving me with an aunt or leaving me with some neighbor who they trusted. And that was daycare. The financial support, even that was buttressed by the support that people got from the community as well. And so even that has been replaced by governmental support. Again, not that may not be necessary in very many situations, but it feels as if there's an over-reliance on that and less a reliance on the more natural, more nuanced social support systems that exist in communities. And so I wonder if that is just a natural progression of a society, of an industrialized society, and that less industrialized societies have no choice but to rely and make do with what they have and the human resources. And if that is the case, then how do we re-envision culture and community and village, understanding that going forward, there's going to be probably less of those intimate village kinds of interactions, that the village is going to look very different. How do we manage that tension between that traditional village and the village that is what people might call progress or progressive?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the village definitely will look different. Now in some instances, it will look similar because I think in the village you describe, you have connections by kin, right? You have communities where people, even if they're not from the same exact family, right? The family networks are a little closer and a little tighter. So you start life with a higher level of trust as opposed to a neighbor who's just moving in. You don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. So you just don't know them as well. So I think it's possible to recreate that. Like my best friend who still lives in New York actually purchased the home next to his parents after the couple who lived there, after the husband retired from the police department and moved away. So his daughters get to grow up right next door to his parents, which is very similar to, how it used to be in the old country and in the old days. So, and his sister and brother-in-law live maybe 5 minutes away. So it's possible. Will it be like that in every person's life? No. Right. And I can use myself as an example. After leaving New York for college, I came back briefly after I graduated, but haven't lived in New York on a regular basis for almost 20 years now. So the village that my wife and I are creating looks different than his village. So our village is more so with friends, close people who've grown closer to us over the years, people we know from church, so that, for instance, when my wife was going through our second and third pregnancies and got dehydrated at different points, we called on one particular friend who came over, dropped everything she was doing, came over and stayed with our kids. It's different, right? It's not the same as if I was growing up next door to my parents, but it is how we have managed to recreate that village in an environment that neither of us grew up in. Now, people who we know who are from this area, their networks look a little bit different because, again, they can rely on parents and aunts and uncles and cousins. But we're creating ours in a slightly different way, and just finding a way to make it work for us. And I think for a lot of families, that will be what things look like moving forward. But again, it wasn't, us. It's not us saying, "Oh, we need the government to do this," or to step in this particular way. And my wife was a social worker for several years in D.C., and we realized, like, there were people she was working with who had a social worker in their family going back at least 3 generations. So as I said, that's not the type of village that we're trying to recreate. We think it's possible to do it in a highly industrialized, highly digitized, oftentimes much more individualized and atomized society. But a big part of it is just having the desire to have people around you who share your values that can help as you raise children.
So I don't want to argue learned helplessness, the idea that people get to a point and they've just learned to be at that point. But there's a large swath of families across the U.S. If we just take New York City, there's a large swath of families that have very little control over where they're going to live from year to year, from month to month, because they can't afford. They might be working 3-4 jobs. So they have neither the luxury of time or finances or advocacy skills. And so how do you get those individuals to get on board with building a village? How do you build a village when you're trying to make sure that there's food on the table? You're trying to make sure that there's a roof over the head of your kids.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is difficult, right? We're at a time where everything seems to be getting more and more expensive. I think part of the reason that we have challenges with the village is because oftentimes the chief is not there. And what I mean by that is, again, going back to where we started in terms of family structure. There are neighborhoods, particularly working class, low income Black neighborhoods in this country, where you would struggle to find a single child being raised by a married mom and dad. And that's not just in New York. I could tick off all the largest cities. You're going to find neighborhoods where that's the case. Here in D.C., 77% of Black children in D.C. are born to unmarried parents. And just for the sake of context, not for the sake of comparison, but for the sake of context, 93% of white children are born to married parents. Now, that is a far greater disparity than what you'll find in any other state. But I only say it to say that in an increasing number of neighborhoods, to be a Black child born to and raised by your married biological parents is now the exception and not the rule. So I think one reason why we find, these economic difficulties is because the family, that 2-parent family model has fractured and is no longer the norm in many communities, because the median household income for Black married couples under the age of 65, so these obviously working age couples, is about $122,000. That is higher than the overall median household income for every single racial group of the 4 major, right? White, Black, Hispanic, Asian. That's higher than even Asian American household median income. But the reason that the income disparities exist in the way that they do, because overall median household income for Black families is about $56,000. But the reason that's the case is because only 28% of Black households are comprised of a married mom and a dad. So part of our problem is that that family structure that used to be the norm and that sustained the Black community from the end of the Civil War through the end of the Civil Rights Movement no longer exists in the same way that it did 60 plus years ago. And the thing that troubles me is not just that this is a fact of life. The thing that troubles me is that there are people who, even if they don't say that that's a good thing, they'll say, oh, well, Black dads are not really that important. If we could end structural and systemic racism and improve the amount of resources that are flowing into Black families from the government. And I find that troubling. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Harvard sociologist Christina Cross. and her new book, Inherited Inequality. But she basically makes that argument. She acknowledges that the two-parent families produce better outcomes than single-parent families, but she argues that black children who grow up in two-parent families don't do as well as white kids who grow up in two-parent families, and therefore we should focus less on family structure when it comes to improving outcomes for black kids and black families, and focus more on the barriers created by systemic racism and more on increasing support to, single moms and their children. And that's the part that disturbs me the most, because that is only a recipe for even more of the outcomes that, again, I'm arguing are not positive for the black community.
Yeah, that would be a very damning argument to make. Again, I've not read the book. I'm not aware of it either. But if that is the underlying or the front-facing argument, that's a pretty damning statement or pretty damning conclusion to come to, considering what we know about families and about the importance of fathers in families, regardless of the background of the family, racial or otherwise. But it sounds like there's been this decimation of black fathers in families and the black family in general. What are you teaching your sons and your daughters about fatherhood as a way of seeding the next generation and as a way of kind of helping other fathers think about what they should be talking with their kids about with regard to fatherhood?
I love the way you phrase it, and you talked about seeding. And the reason I love that is because I think the rules of family culture follow the rules of agriculture, meaning the things that you want to grow, you have to plant, water, and give light to. And then the things that threaten a good harvest, you have to weed and prune. So part of what I do to seed that for my kids, and I have 2 sons and 2 daughters, is that my wife and I always connect the vocation of father to the vocation of husband. So even now, our boys are 5 and 7. When we talk to them about, the future, if they say, yeah, I can't wait till I'm a dad, they will acknowledge it themselves, or we will remind them, but first you need a wife, right? So let's get first things first. And I think it has become so common for them that, recently we were on a family vacation, and my son, my older son, met one of my cousins who I don't think he had met her before. And, she was talking to him, and he asked her, where her husband was. Now, unfortunately, her husband passed away several years ago. And she spoke to him, she was gentle with him because he was 6 at the time. And, my dad would say, no, you can't say that, and that's rude. But I didn't chastise him at all because I want that to be his norm. I want him to always have husband, father, family connected. And for there not to be a breakage where it's okay, well, sometimes you can be a husband if you want to, or then you can have kids, if you want to, but those two things are not, two things are not related. I don't want him to grow up with that as his norm. So part of it is just continuing to reinforce to both my sons and my daughters that certain things have a particular order. And, everybody knows the schoolyard rhyme, right? So first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby and the baby carriage. And the funny thing is that those school kids had the sequence for family formation exactly correct, because the research around the success sequence, as it's called, shows that when young people finish high school, get a job, get married, and then have children, their chances of being in poverty shrink to single digits. So that's a very tangible and explicit way to describe to young people the steps that they can take, right? So within their locus of control, the steps that they can take to ensure and improve their chances of avoiding poverty and pursuing prosperity when they become adults.
Thank you so much for that. So I was thinking about the last election, and I remember it might have been the last vice presidential debates, and I was thinking to myself, I don't hear father issues being discussed on any platform. And I think that was one of the big criticisms of the last election in general, that men did not see men's issues and the voices of men receiving much attention from either side, whether it be the presidential or the vice presidential, from either side of the aisle. If fathers won't be intentionally and genuinely invited into those conversation spaces, into those culture and community shaping spaces, village regeneration spaces, how can fathers in general become more involved in shaping the systems that affect them and their families?
Well, I think some men are starting to become more vocal in terms of advocating for structural change, let's say to, as I mentioned before, family court, right, when it comes to issues of custody, and just their rights as equal parents. So I think there's a move in that direction. I will say this, and I try not to make my work too partisan, because I don't think sometimes it makes conversations less productive.
Nope. Yeah.
But you brought up the issue of politics in the election, and I can say as someone who works at a conservative think tank, on the conservative side of the aisle, on the right side of the aisle, there is a great deal of attention to the impact of fathers. Like almost every, whether it's a conservative scholar, think tanks, politicians, are constantly bringing up these issues. Okay, what can we do to ensure more kids are raised with a father in the home, right? How can we elevate the importance of fathers as it relates to the sort of, affection, protection, direction, and correction of their children? So I know that there's energy in that, for this issue on that side of the aisle. In fact, recently the mayor, city council chair, and attorney general of Washington, D.C. were asked in a hearing on public safety and crime, a congressional hearing, were asked what the city is doing, one, to ensure more children are born with a father in the home, and two, to ensure that more fathers stay in the home after their kids are born. And I can tell, as someone who worked for the city for over a decade, I know for sure that was probably one of the first, if not the first time, that those people have been asked that question in a public setting. So I think there's, again, some energy around this issue, particularly on the center right. On the center left, it's a challenge. And again, this actually goes back to the election. What the political party that most black voters support brags and prides itself on elevating the issues of women. And they will say, black women save the party, black women save the country, and every once in a while they'll say black women save the world. When they talk to black women, when Democrats talk to black women, they say, vote for us, and we will put you in charge. We will make you a vice president. We will make you a Supreme Court justice. When they talk to black men, they either scold them for not being as enthusiastic about candidates, or they say, vote for us and we'll keep you from being a victim of, police brutality or systemic racism. It's a very different message. It's not a message that acknowledges the role that men play as leaders in their home. And I actually think that this not only creates tension within the black community, it exacerbates existing tension along gender lines. So it's unlikely that you're going to hear, the types of commentary around the importance of fathers, because so much of the left's energy is around empowering women. And one thing I will say, and I'll give credit to former President Obama, he regularly would make the connection between marriage and family structure and social outcomes. He did it when he ran for president in 07 and 08. He did it when he was in his first term. He did it in his second term. But whenever he would talk about, he did it when he spoke to the young men at Morehouse,
Right.
During the commencement ceremony. And whenever he talked about the importance of marriage, fatherhood, and family, he would always get criticized from his black progressive flank. Those were the people who would criticize him for doing it, because they would say, he's lecturing black people, he's talking down to black people, and he's not putting enough emphasis and attention on how structural and systemic racism keep black families from moving forward, that type of thing. So it's a difficult sort of landscape, because the people who would be most likely to talk about the importance of fathers and families are not necessarily the voices that most black folks are listening to. And then the voices that most black folks are listening to, the progressive politicians, pundits, professors, preachers, and performers, typically support politics that don't talk about men in these types of empowering and leadership terms.
I like your treatment of the two elements, or at least the two sides, and I think it's an interesting overview of how difficult it is to thread that needle. The argument of the two. I think you're very correct. One of the challenges that we heard from the Democratic side was that black men didn't feel seen during the campaign, and it felt a little bit like an afterthought when they were brought in. And then I hear you talk about some of the work that's being done on the conservative side, and I hear in my view, even as you describe it, the work seems very narrow and very rigid. So I hear conversations about helping families stay intact, helping families, helping individuals kind of move towards marriage. But I don't hear, what do we do about those who are already unmarried? We can't legislate them into marriage. We can't force them into marriages. What do we do about the individuals who are going to be unmarried, who might choose to have children and remain unmarried, because that's their right? And what do we do about those children who are already in that space? Where do we create space for them? It feels almost like a very tight circle. If you're not married and Christian and particular socioeconomic demographic, then you have to figure out how to get yourself into this space, or you will not get whatever resources, or you will not get we won't be talking about you. How does the conservative side of the argument attract, speak directly to black fathers? So it's not just speaking to fathers. There's a very specific history. There's a very specific underlying story of black fatherhood. How does the progressive side of the argument speak that in a way that is genuine and concerned for the upliftment of families? And the flip, how do we get progressives and Democrats to recognize and appreciate the importance of black fathers and of fathers in general, and not just do that in words, but do that in policy, do that in conversation, do that in space, do that with equality across those constituencies. And that may not be something that you can speak to, and that's fine if you can as well. But it just feels like either people have chosen their tribes and have chosen to stick on their tribes and will go down with the ship, or that hopefully there are people on either side who want to find that common ground, who want to find that common space, and would be willing to do the work it takes to get to that point where everybody's thriving.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a difficult needle to thread. I think on the right, on the conservative side, again, there's a lot of energy around upholding and uplifting the importance of fathers. And not just fathers of a particular socioeconomic, status is it's fathers in general. If anything, one of the knocks against conservatives is that they talk so much about family structure, and progressives will say they don't talk enough about other sort of mediating social structures, right? Not enough about cost of housing and healthcare and criminal justice and all these other things. So I definitely think conservatives are more than willing to talk about those things. Now, do they tend to put them in racial terms? No. That doesn't tend to be the case. Now, someone like me would, because I'm comfortable doing that. There are some other men out there. I know I'm thinking of someone like Chris Broussard, who is a Fox Sports commentator, but also has his King organization that targets African American men, husbands, dads. I believe it's a Christian organization too. So he has that religious element. There's some other people out there who are doing similar types of work. They don't always necessarily get the attention that they deserve. So I think conservatives, again, tend to get the fatherhood issue correct, even if they don't market it in racially specific ways. Now, obviously, there are some black conservatives or black folks on the center-right who I think can fill that void and need to fill that void. And I actually would be far more content, and I would be far happier to see black conservatives spend 90% of their social, sort of cultural, educational, and even economic capital speaking into the issues that most affect the black community, right? Trying to rebuild those institutions, as opposed to trying to convince people to vote for another, Republican candidate, whether for president, governor, mayor, or any other office. So I think there's some space there. I think the challenge is a little bit more difficult on the left because, again, you're talking about competing ideologies and worldviews. One that sees men in general, and black men in particular, primarily as voters and not as husbands and fathers. So this is why these outreach efforts tend to happen once every 4 years, right? Every election cycle, and they tend to carry a particular type of message. And oftentimes, if I could boil it down, it's black men should get in line and follow black women because black women are leading the community with respect to political engagement. And this is why when any critical mass of black men start to question that publicly, they are chastised and castigated and called all types of names. And, your ancestors are ashamed of you. How could you consider not voting, in alignment with black women? So it presents a different challenge because decades of sort of post-second wave feminist cultural education, I'll put it that way, have sent the message that if you take care of the women, right? If women are empowered, if they are educationally empowered and financially independent, that they would then take care of the rest of the household and the family. And that is a message that actually goes not just contrary to, any major religious teaching, but actually goes contrary to human nature. Because no society teaches its women that it's their responsibility to take care of an adult male and the children that they have together. That responsibility for provision and protection has always fallen on the shoulders of men. But when you write the man out of the story and you say the family will be just as strong if you have an empowered woman and an activated government, then what you're doing is making it more difficult for men to fulfill their God-given rightful roles, not just in their home, but in society. And so until the progressive left is willing to let go of that particular ideology, it's going to be very difficult for men with traditional values to take up the role that is rightfully theirs, more so on a public scene. This happens every day on an individual level. But if you and I wanted to, go to some, Congressional Black Caucus or the Democratic National Convention and talk about empowering fathers and men to lead their homes and their communities, there are going to be some sisters who don't necessarily want to hear that message because that is not the message that they've been pushing. The message they've been pushing is that black women lead the family. And again, 70% of black children born to unmarried mothers, 45% raised by single mothers. So you can see why they would see that. They lead the family, they lead the community, they lead the party, and sort of, they lead in every other sphere. So those two things are in tension in ways that are much more difficult to resolve than some of the tensions on the center right.
Thank you so much for that. I think those are some really, one, I think a really good analysis of both sides. Obviously, I think it feels a lot more damning on the Democratic side, for want of a better word. And my hope is that the bipartisanship that American politics used to be known for is hopefully going to return, and that the conversations, so for example, even a conversation like this, I'm sure you might have successfully gotten me canceled after based on a few things that you were just saying. I was like, up. There go my very paltry numbers. Mm-hmm. they're gonna drop. But even being able to sit across from somebody and have an argument, or not an argument, have a conversation that says, here are the things that I know and believe, and let's talk about what you know and believe, and figure out how we can come to a point where the best outcome is possible and feasible for all peoples. Not for all people. It's never going to be for all people, but for as many people as possible. And if we're talking about rebuilding the village, Democrats cannot rebuild the village. Republicans and conservatives cannot rebuild the village. It takes the whole village to rebuild the village, or what is left of the village. So I often think of Jamaica, their recent experience with the hurricane. Half of the village or the area that was destroyed, half of those people cannot sit back and say, we're not going to do anything, it's going to take care of itself, while the other half works. They may have different ways that they think it needs to happen. They may have different ideologies of what they think it should look like going forward. But even in their differences, those constituents need to come together and have human conversations, have open conversations. And sometimes it might be contentious, and that's okay. As long as we're not attacking each other, but attacking ideologies and thoughts. And eventually distilling that down to what can we agree upon is the best first step, or the most feasible first step. Do we need a policy? Do we need a group to start thinking about it? Do we need something happening at the community level? Do we need something happening at the governmental level, church level, or wherever? And then move on with that. But it feels that like at this point, like I said before, people have chosen their tribes and are wearing their war colors, and people have their hackles up and are not prepared to have conversations because you're a this or you're a that. So obviously I can't speak to you because those are going to be your talking points and those are going to be my talking points, rather than can we just have a conversation as two human beings and decide what we can do to make sure the lives of every individual that we can touch can be bettered. So, sorry, it looks like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, and I think it's most important to focus on the right individual, like the right customer for this message, right? So let me put it this way. Oftentimes in these discussions around family, regardless of race, the desires of adults are often elevated above the rights of children. And the work that I do tries to bring a different perspective, because that particular way of doing things actually inverts the moral order, because it demands that the weak sacrifice for the benefit of the strong. So in this way, it's, well, it doesn't matter what's best for the kids, because it's all about what makes the adults happy. And if, a man and a woman just want to, situationship, fling, it doesn't really matter. Okay, we bring a child into the world, it doesn't really matter. And then the child has to be the one who's left picking up the pieces of that shattered relationship between mom and dad. So what I try to do in my work is to say, no, all of the movement and the energy around, rebuilding the village, reviving marriage, restoring the family, should keep the interests of children at its heart. Because parents, the strong, should be willing to sacrifice for their children. Because that's what it calls for. So you're gonna have to trade day parties for birthday parties. That's just it's part of the deal. So in that sense, there's a lot of groups who say, well, Delano, if we do it this way, then I'm not going to get what I want. Yes, that's true.
That is the bargain.
It may not feel good, but the alternative is to continue to impose on children. And I say, like, the collateral damage in the gender war is always the children. When men and women fight about who's to blame for the breakdown of the family, the only innocent party in the entire household is the child, and they're the ones that have to pick up the pieces. So yes, some people may not like some of what I've said to this point, which is ironic because I'm behaving myself when I'm talking this way. Right? 'Cause I could get a lot more specific and raw, but I won't, because I had on a suit today. But some people are not gonna like it.
Right.
But it's like, no, if we can continue to do the same thing we're doing, and again,
Right.
50 years down the line,
It has not been working, though.
it's not working, and it's not working specifically for our children. That hole, that father absence, right? That father hunger does not get filled easily, and not with trinkets, not with a check from the government, not with periodic, in and out sort of relationship from a dad. No, children deserve a dad in the same way that they deserve a mom. And as I said, they have a right to a father in the same way they have a right to a mom. And I use that word intentionally because rights always come with corresponding obligations. And if we say that, if we flip it and say, no, adults have rights to kids, then it's like, okay, well, if I have a right to something, then that means if I have a positive right to something, that means somebody's obligated to give it to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a right to a child that I couldn't create. But my children, once conceived, once created, have a right to me, to the affection, the protection, the correction, and direction of the man and woman who created them. And I think for too long we have allowed those rights to go neglected.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to push us because I think we're way over time at this point. So this is the rapid fire round.
Sure.
Where I'll ask you 5 questions. No need to explain your response. Just give us your response. Okay. So first one, your favorite fatherhood memory.
Playing catch with my dad at the park.
A book that every father should read. Outside of your book that's coming out next year.
A book that every father should read. That's a good one. You stumped me. Can we come back to that one?
Okay.
Right.
Internet, I stumped Delano. Just so you know.
Yeah, you did.
Biggest lesson learned the hard way.
Biggest lesson learned the hard way is that my failure to take responsibility for my life has consequences that other people are going to have to deal with.
One word to describe Black fatherhood.
Necessary.
And who's your fatherhood hero?
Outside of my own dad?
Yeah. I mean, it could be your dad too.
Oh yeah, my dad, without a doubt. Without a doubt. My dad modeled consistency, discipline, order, structure, and the type of love that, a precocious boy needed growing up in New York City.
And back to a book every father should read.
I'm going to say the book of Ephesians in the Bible, particularly chapters 5 and 6, because that lays out the ideal relationship between God-ordained relationship between husband and wife, as well as the duties and obligations that a father has to his children, and what God expects from children in return with respect to their parents.
Excellent. And on that note, what message would you like to leave to fathers and parents listening, and where can people follow your work?
So the message I would like to leave to fathers is that, again, you matter. Your children need you. You are not just a nice add-on to the necessity of a mom, that they need you as much as they need they need their mother. So I encourage men to understand that, to lean into that role, to accept it as their God-given responsibility, and to begin planting the seeds today that will lead to a bountiful harvest generations down the road when you are long gone. If you do what needs to be done in this generation, you will have descendants who benefit, who sit under the shade of a tree that you planted that you'll never get to see grow. So again, dads, we need you. And the house needs you, the family needs you, the children need you, and our women need you. In terms of where people can follow me, they can follow me on X, a.k.a. Twitter, at Delano Squires, Delano Squires, all one string. And then, as I said, my book should be out, Lord willing, next June 16th. So June 16th, 2026. And I'll be doing a lot more talking there.
That's just around Juneteenth.
Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you very much, Delano. The village is broken, but it can be rebuilt.
Absolutely.
That is such a message of hope. And to all the fathers, every father, black, white, polka dot, striped, all fathers out there who are listening, you matter. If any message comes through every conversation that we've had across the Black Fathers Pulse podcast, it's that you matter. Your presence matters, and your voice is needed. Thank you so much again, Delano, for your presence.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Black Fathers Pulse. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Views shared on this podcast are mine or that of my guest and are not associated with the university. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva, artwork by Isabella Accra. The podcast is produced by me and is supported by the kind contributions of you, the public, and advertisers. Follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758, that's Dr_AT758, or the Black Fathers Pulse podcast on Instagram and YouTube. Subscribe to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast wherever you do your podcast listening, and don't forget to share and leave us a positive review.